So can you tell us the difference between ECHO and the Roving Caregivers program?
I don't think there is. Do you want me to use the mic?
Yeah, but you can just go ahead.
Okay, I can just go ahead. I don't think there is a major or meaningful difference between the two. What is significant in terms of ECHO versus Roving Caregivers program is the actual delivery and the mechanism that is being used for the delivery. In the Roving Caregivers program, we have trained young and not so young persons from within the communities in early childhood development theories and methodologies. Whereas in ECHO, we're using existing healthcare workers, namely community health aides, and training them in the same, using the same curriculum that is being used with the rovers. So the fundamental difference between the two really is just really what existing system and structure is being used within the Ministry of Health versus what has been built up from the ground from practically nothing with the Roving Caregivers program, where we've actually trained persons just to deliver that. So I think that's where there is some difference, but I don't see it as fundamental because they're using the same curriculum, they are using the same approaches, but obviously the CHAs have other duties, and they will continue those other duties, but really just infuse these new techniques into the existing delivery of services to the families and the communities.
But some may ask, why bother to have two programs when basically at the end of the day you're getting almost similar results? Why don't you just incorporate it
Right.
or just use one?
Right. Well, ultimately what we are planning for, and I'm sure the Permanent Secretary has articulated this vision, is that we want to be able to sustain the Roving Caregivers program. It was designed as a project, so essentially we are piloting the use of roving caregivers to deliver a service, but we recognize that the model is sufficiently pliable that it can be adapted to different contexts. So it can be adapted to a healthcare context. And we thought, given that we've got existing persons that are already going into their home, they're already in the communities, and fairly well trained in terms of communication and interface with people at the community level, why not try to see if this might be a modality through which we can sustain and certainly institutionalize the concept of the Roving Caregivers program. The funding for the Roving Caregivers program comes from external sources, namely the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, which is based in Holland. There is some subvention given by the Ministry of Education and support from the Ministry of National Mobilization. But at the end of 2011, that external source of funding comes to an end. So rather than wait until then to figure out how we will ensure that this roving caregivers, not even necessarily just the program as it is conquered, but certainly the concept of a roving caregivers program, how can we have that institutionalized into what government is already doing? A very compelling argument, certainly for us, and I know for our partners in the Ministry of Health, is that particularly at a time when government resources are shrinking in difficult economic climate, we need to see how we can rationalize the delivery of social services and certainly healthcare, and to do so in a way in which we're not duplicating, but certainly trying to allow for some convergence between different sectors. So I think, and only this morning I was saying to the coordinator for the Roving Caregivers program that St. Vincent presents us with a very exciting opportunity to, for the first time I think in a real sense, to show how we can meaningfully converge education, social mobilization or social development, and health. It's some, sure.
Why so? Why does St. Vincent present this interesting opportunity?
Through the ECHO, I think this would be the first time that the region will see that type of multi-sectoral integrated approach to providing care and services for young children and their families in disadvantaged situations. It's something that policymakers have talked about, certainly from the time I've known myself, in development work. And it's something theoretically that, makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually bring together a Ministry of Health, Education, and National Mobilization to provide what is often called a continuum of services for children from even prenatally right through to entry into formal education, which for most intents and purposes starts at 5. And this, I think, presents an opportunity for us to do that. That through the ECHO, we're able to work with mothers during pregnancy, right through birth, into delivery, into the early years. And education certainly comes in once they get into the school system. Social development, or national mobilization as it's called here, attends to those in daycare, birth to 3 years old. So it's really an exciting, opportunity I see here, and certainly will serve to be more cost effective than trying to preserve an additional structure. So rather than run, as you suggested, 2 parallel structures, that's not the intention. We want to be able to see how it can be integrated into what already exists on the ground for government. I don't think any governments in the region will take any of us very seriously if we ask now to say, well, we need $100,000 additionally on your budget to support this program. Most policymakers and financial planners would say, well, show me how this can fit into what we are already doing, and certainly make it a lot more cost effective. So that's what we are attempting to do, and certainly to show to the rest of the region that this convergence of sectors can really happen, and we are extremely excited about it.
I have heard of the roving caregivers before in the past, but somehow, I don't know if it's a PR has stepped up, but it seems to be all over now. So I think a lot of people are not too familiar. One, they don't really understand what it does, and we are also battling with the historical or traditional way of caring for children, in terms of a lot of people still feel, oh, they're too young to go to daycare, you leave them at home until a certain time. How important is early childhood education? Using these programs, the ECHO and the roving caregivers, to a child, as opposed to one who is traditionally brought up. Stay at home with grandma, auntie, whomever, until they're at 4 or 5 and they go off to school.
I'm a strong advocate for the grannies staying at home and keeping children at home during those very formative years. What is, I think, the added value of the approach that the RCP and the ECHO brings is that we're saying that we want to really help caregivers, primary caregivers, whoever that may be in the home, right in their home environment, to better stimulate their children, to prepare them for formal education, recognizing that research has been undertaken that shows that the critical brain development takes place in the first 3 years of life. That is something that most people don't have an appreciation for. As you rightfully said, most people tend to think, a 12-month-old baby can't learn, he or she eats, sleep, and that's it, and cries. But what this approach is certainly been proven quite effectively is that children learn even from within the womb, and therefore, if primary caregivers, even if the children are kept at home, can stimulate, can interact with, can find ways in which children can be positively stimulated, even through basic, just even reading a story or telling a story if one isn't literate. These are some of the ways in which we are trying to really change some of the thinking that is associated with early learning. As you rightfully said, when you talk about, early childhood development, for a lot of people, it doesn't mean a lot. And what we certainly at a regional level have been trying to do is to change the level of awareness. So you've been seeing a lot about RCP, and that's very deliberate. But we also want people now to be able to connect the dots. What does roving caregivers and what does ECHO mean in terms of development outcomes for children, for families, and even more at a macro level in terms of changing or even intervening in that cycle of poverty? We've been doing a lot of collection of secondary research that is pointing to the fact that there is a strong correlation between early childhood experiences and adult social and economic, and so how do we really connect those dots that it makes sense to people, that they know, and certainly for families in disadvantaged and sometimes even very remote settings who don't access a lot of social services. They hardly come into town. You know, the children stay at home. There's no real communication. There's no stimulation of the children. How do we really intervene and support those parents? Because we're not coming with a deficit approach that they know nothing. We're coming to say, well, how can we support you in your attempts, no matter at what level they're at, to better